So the telomere is part of the DNA at the end, but it's not the blueprint. The gene is the blueprint. The telomere is just an extra piece of DNA. You say, why have an extra piece of DNA? Let me show you how it's copied. How do you copy a DNA? You bring an enzyme in called a polymerase. It sits on the DNA. And as it moves down the DNA, it leaves behind the copy. But look, let's watch it one more time. You ready? Watch it again. The polymerase sits on the DNA and copies what's in front of it. So when it gets to the end, the last piece, it's not copying the last piece. So now the copy is shorter than the original one. Do you see that? One more time. So this side, I just want to point it out. When the polymerase lands on the DNA, it copies what's in front, and as it copies, it doesn't copy what it's sitting on. So the next copy is shorter. I go, why is that important? Every time the cell divides, it gets shorter. The DNA strand gets shorter. But if I put the extra telomere on there, that's okay, because what I'm cutting off is not really part of the blueprint. It's just extra telomere, okay? But every time I reproduce the DNA, the next copy is shorter than the original one. What does it mean? Think about it. Every time I copy, I lose a piece. Then how many copies before the telomere is gone? And all of a sudden, biologists start to recognize you can only reproduce the DNA a certain number of times, because if you reproduce it too much, you cut in now into the blueprint part and lose that. So the length of the telomere is very critical, because if you get it too short, then the DNA frays open and then you lose part of the DNA. That's when aging, disease, and depression start showing up in older life. Why? Because you copied this DNA so many times. Every time you made a new cell, you copied it, you lose a piece. And all of a sudden you say, wow, then by this definition, we should all live a certain amount of time. And then by then, repeating and dividing the cells, then what happens is we lose the DNA, and then we age, and then we die. Well, that would be true, except for something very interesting. There's an enzyme that increases the length of the telomere. So the length of the telomere is proportional to aging, disease, and depression. Short telomeres means you're getting close to the aging and the disease as a result of cutting into the blueprint. But here's the exciting part. There's an enzyme called telomerase, an enzyme that it can increase the length. So all of a sudden it says, if you can activate the enzyme, then the cells can keep dividing without any problem. Aging is stalled. You can slow down and stop aging by adding the telomerase. I go, wow, that's great. Then how long can we live? And the answer right now, it's expected by science that your minimum age is 140. But right now, we're not lasting that long. I say, why aren't we lasting that long? Because we find that part of our lifestyle shuts off the telomerase. And I go, what affects telomerase? Well, number one is this. The telomerase enzyme can be inhibited by these things. You ready? Number one, stressful prenatal development. Meaning that your mother was stressed, and in the process, the stress hormones cross from her blood into the placenta and affect the reproduction of the telomeres in the fetus. And all of a sudden you say, oh my goodness, if my mother was having a struggle and a hard time, she was under stress, then when I was developing, I wasn't giving extra length that was needed, because there's a lot of cell division in the embryo and the fetus. But if the stress hormones are in there, it doesn't allow the recovery of that telomere. And so people who were stressed in the womb end up having much more of an effect on aging and disease and depression than those who grew up in a healthy womb. Number two, childhood abuse. When you're abused as a child, and let me give you a very important reality fact, abuse, being a physical abuse or verbal abuse, equally the same thing. They have the exact same impact. You say, I never beat my child. Yeah, of course, I yelled at him a lot. But the fact is, well, beating him and yelling at him is the same thing, because both of them shut off the telomerase. Okay? Number 3, domestic violence is a big aspect of shutting down telomerase. 4, post-traumatic stress disorder. People who have experienced very serious stresses in their lives shut down telomerase. 5, nutritional deficiency leads to an inhibition of telomerase. And lastly, but also importantly, loss of love. If you're in love and you lose your partner for whatever reason, you will suffer at the aspect of shutting off telomerase. It will cause you to age faster and introduce disease. And all of a sudden it says, my goodness, all of these are sources of stress. Stress promotes rapid aging, disease, and depression. That is a result of interfering with telomerase activity. Well, I can say what can interfere with it, but guess what? I can also tell you the things that enhance it, that can make your telomerase work better and longer, which gives you a longer life, a healthier life, and a happier life. In other words, you can adjust this by your lifestyle. So let's just go over the list of what can advance telomerase. Number 1, good nutrition, especially omega-3s. Number 2, exercise. When you exercise, then you're providing an environment that causes the telomerase. That would be called eustress. Remember I said good stress? It promotes your growth. Yeah, so exercise enhances telomerase. Self-love. I say, what's self-love have to do with it? And I also told you yesterday, we'll talk about it again, most of our programming from parents is self-critical. So if you grew up being criticized by your parents as not good enough, not deserving, not whatever, then you will lose self-love. You'll be critical of yourself. But that's what the programming would have done to us. If you can acquire self-love, stop being critical of yourself. Start recognizing you're a wonderful person in there, even though the programs may suck. You're still that wonderful person. Acquire self-love, and will add to your health and your life. Happiness and gratitude. Rather than focusing on the negative things, being happy and just being joyful for life. That thought, the chemistry from that thought released by the brain. Remember, the brain creates the culture medium, which feeds the cells. The brain in happiness and the brain in gratitude releases chemistry that causes telomerase to work. Focusing on the positive. Very difficult in our world because we wake up and our fears are, oh my God, I'm going to have trouble with my job. On my job, I could get cancer. Oh my God, something's going to happen to my family. All of those negative things, if you focus on that, shut off the telomerase. If you focus on the fact, hey, life is great. I'm having a wonderful day. I love my partner. I love my job. Well, that gives you the positive aspect, which increases telomerase. And mindfulness. And mindfulness, we're going to expand on a little bit, means stay in the conscious mind, the mind that has wishes and desires. If you live in the conscious mind and don't go to the subconscious mind, then you're adding the chemistry into the blood that enhances telomerase. So basically, telomerase is like a barometer. Low telomerase, you're heading toward disease, aging, depression. High telomerase, longevity, health, and happiness. That's as simple as this biology goes. But remember, the enzyme isn't being controlled by genes. The enzyme is being controlled by how you respond to the environment. If you're a negative person, then by definition, you are continuously shutting down a telomerase and preparing for the eventuality of disease. Very important.